Hit it.
What's up, everyone? This is your friendly neighborhood Ableton certified trainer, Orville Kline. I'm here representing the Ableton User Group Chicago, and we have an awesome workshop planned for you guys tonight. Thanks for taking the time out of your evening to tune in, get some information. Um, I just like we've been doing this new format of the online version of our Ableton User Group Chicago for about a year now. We just passed that year since lockdown happened, and one of the good things that came out of it is we were able to put on these awesome workshops with different guests from all over the country and all over the world. Today's workshop is going to be focused primarily on the mechanics and the business of producing audio and music for video games. I have two awesome guests that are going to be taking some time to really break it down to and showing you how this stuff works. We have Araham Spice, who's a fellow Ableton certified trainer, and he's from the East Coast tuning in. We also have Elliot Callighan from Chicago, and you work for which company, Elliot? What's up? Sorry, it
Unlock
is
Audio.
Unlock Audio. Sorry, thank you. And he's also an instructor at the Paul, and he's doing a ton of really awesome game audio production for Unlock Audio, and he's going to be breaking stuff down to you. So if you guys are tuned in, say what up in the comments. Let us know how we look, how we sound. Make sure everything is running smooth on your end. All the feedback, any feedback we get makes the viewing experience for you guys go better, and it makes our job easier too. So we know if we're keeping you guys interested and engaged. So I like to kick off the beginning of each workshop before we formally get started with a chance for any general Q&A. We have three university instructors in the line. We have a couple Ableton certified trainers, and now's your chance to get some freebie questions in. And we also have a colleague of mine, Hovey Williams, goes by the Project Slam Horse. He's going to be tuning in, and he's tuning in right now on Zoom. And if again, just let us know if you're here in the comments, how it looks, how it sounds, and let's get started. Graham, how you doing tonight?
Having a great day, man. It's been a beautiful day up over here in Virginia, and the sun has been shining, and the bugs are already out. How annoying is that? Like, I thought we'd get at least a few more weeks with no bugs.
Nice. That's a good sign. It's a sign that spring's here, bugs are out, sun's out, bun's out, all that fun stuff. All right. But yeah, just say what up in the comments. Let us know if you have any questions. Thanks for tuning in, Carol. She's a regular for all of our workshops like this. We got about 12 people in. So in the meantime, could you tell us a little bit about your background, Graham? Like, what do you do with music? What are you up to lately? And what are you going to be talking about tonight?
Sure. I've been playing music since I was a little kid, and still love to play. Haven't been playing enough lately, but I look forward to returning. I play guitar and keyboards and a couple of other instruments very poorly. And but Ableton Live makes it pretty easy to play instruments poorly as long as I can play the drums for about 2 bars consistently. That's all I need to make a good drum loop. But I teach at a school called Shenandoah Conservatory in Winchester, Virginia, which is about an hour west of Washington, D.C.
Cool. And what are you teaching there?
So I teach in a degree program called MPRT, or Music Production and Recording Technology. So we do everything from studio recording to remote recording to live sound reinforcement, audio for video and games, and then even audio for AR, VR, and we're trying to give a well-rounded audio education here.
That's awesome. And today you're going to be showing us basically how game audio works. So this is a topic that I think a lot of people just are kind of in the dark. If you're not actually working on it or involved or really kind of deep into it, it could kind of seem like a little bit overwhelming, or like in the sense that there's a lot of mystery shrouded over like how it actually works, how to get involved in it, and actually what it takes to get like just your musical ideas that you might be producing in Ableton actually implemented into the programming inside of a game that someone else can play and interact with and be never ending. So I'm excited just for myself to learn, because I don't know anything about this topic. This is one workshop where I'm here to learn just as much as anyone else is tuned in. So I'm really excited to see what you guys talk about. So if you're ready, Graham, why don't you take it away and let's learn some stuff.
Let's do it. Let's do it. So I've got a slide presentation here to kind of go along with what I'm going to be talking about. As long as today's March 23rd and this is the Chicago Ableton User Group, I think we're on to good things
That's
here.
we're in a great start already.
All right.
100%.
Good deal. So as I was saying, I teach at Shenandoah Conservatory in Winchester, Virginia. I'm an Ableton certified trainer. Thank you for that shout out. I'm also Avid certified instructor and a Wise certified instructor. We're going to be talking a little bit about Wise today. I went to Belmont University in Nashville for my undergrad, went to IUPUI for my master's degree, lived and worked in Nashville for a long time, have worked at a couple different universities since then. And I do play. I'm a keyboard player, guitar player. I love iOS apps. That's kind of like one of my research areas that I'm super into. And lately, I've been trying to get into interactive music. And so that's kind of what I'm going to be getting at. Here's some album credits that I've done in the past few decades, I guess. Worked a lot with the Dirty Dozen Brass Band out of New Orleans, Bela Fleck and the Flecktones there in Nashville. And then the Jeff Sipe Trio, a awesome group out of North Carolina that if you're into funk jazz, definitely check that record out. It's a fantastic record. And then even such crazy stuff as this band down here called Space Case. So a little metal for you too. I've worked on.
Nice.
I built this instrument, which is a kind of touch-based instrument that utilizes Ableton Live for a friend of mine, Nathan Barlow, who's in Keith Urban's band. So literally, that instrument right there has been traveling the world on a major country tour. I think it's probably the first, and I love that picture of Nathan there at the Grand Ole Opry. It's kind of like representing a sea change, for country music. I just never thought that anything would be. We'd never see anything like that. But
that's wild. That's wild.
Isn't that fun? So to start off with, I just kind of wanted to throw out a question to everybody, and maybe on Facebook, if you want to type in, or if anybody wants to kind of chime in here. What do you think the main differences are between music for film and music for a video game? And I've got Facebook all up also, so maybe I'll see a little something over there. If we don't have any comments, I can roll on, but I just thought I would kind of
let's roll on.
A little interactive here.
Yeah, we'll roll on. There's a little bit of a delay, so it could be a little awkward waiting for it's about a 30-second delay from what we're broadcasting to what everyone else is tuning in on Facebook. So we'll keep rolling for now. I'll try to sneak any in as you're going. So
sure. So one of the main differences between film and music for video game is that film is written in a very linear way, right? So let's see. Dylan says video game music changes pending user decisions. Exactly. So, video game music is really interactive. It's going to be based on where the player is in the game and kind of what they're doing in the game. Whereas film obviously is kind of like a linear process. This gunshot happens at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. We've got to have that sound there, right? So to move on from that, in a video game, we have what's known as the game engine, and that's really the software that kind of delivers the game to you. And as you can see here, there's so many different aspects of the game engine, right? You've got animation and physics and memory and streaming and all these things that the game has to do, right? But somewhere in there, we're going to have some sound too. And so you can imagine with all these things happening, there's a lot of taxation on the CPU when you're delivering the game. And so we want to take that into consideration. We don't want to kill the game with a lot of sound, heavy sound tracks in there. So the other major challenge for sound is that it has to work on lots of different game engines. So you have the main ones with Unreal and Unity. And then you can imagine, what if I want to use some of my favorite plugins from McDSP or Isotope or Steinberg, or maybe I want it to work in Dolby Atmos, right? And then you think about how many platforms games are actually delivered on. I mean, you think about the Oculus Quest, you've got, the Xboxes, the PS whatevers, the, all these different places where games are played, obviously iOS, Android, and Windows and Mac. So A middleware system allows you to not have to be a full on programmer. So, middleware functions just like it sounds. It lives between the game engine and then maybe your DAW, like Ableton Live, right? So, it sits between the composer, the sound designer, and the programmer. So just got some little graphics just to remind us what that looks like, where that might be. You might be a composer, you might be writing the music, and then you can utilize a middleware software to plug that music into the game, right? And so Dale Crowley at the Game Audio Game Sound Con convention says middleware, learn to use it like an instrument. You know, we often talk about things like the push with Ableton Live being an instrument, you know, and learning how to play the push is such a challenge, but it's a fun challenge. And maybe learning how to use middleware is a similar type of challenge as well. So why might you want to learn it? It helps to shape the music you write. So if you're tired of the way that you have been writing music in the past, writing interactive music might make it more interesting, might kind of change the game for you a little bit. What else? You can deliver music that will score a game similar to the way a film is scored. So you can still kind of deliver that kind of cinematic elements. Helps you stay in the creative flow, so you're working inside of this whole interactive machine. And then if you're a composer or a sound designer, having a middleware software that you understand and can put on your resume really differentiates you from other composers. And I think the last one is probably pretty key to everybody too. You can bill for this, and if you are competent in a middleware, it gives you the ability to maybe raise your prices, be involved with different clients, etc. So, what is interactive music? How does it work? And I'm just going to give you a very high level view first, and then we'll go kind of like a little bit more in depth. So, if you think about a game and the mechanics of a game, it basically has two states. Maybe in the case of a game where you're kind of lurking around, you're kind of exploring, that might be game state A, and then game state B might be some battle, right? And oftentimes games also include like a little story that can live in between those moments. So if you think about the princess is stolen away and we want to go save her, that might be a story event. And so as a composer, you want to think about now what happens in between those, right? So we can decide what we're going to do in those transitions. And so that's kind of like a real fun challenge for composers. So you think about now, what does this mean? So oftentimes if you think about like you're coming from one place and going to another, how can I do that? How can I leave a source and reach over to a destination? From leaving the source, you can say, well, I have a bunch of different options. I could immediately leave from the source. I could choose, when you get to the next bar, go ahead and move to the next destination. Maybe there's a queue, etc. And similarly, you have similar options with the destination where you can enter at a certain location, or maybe if you leave the source at bar 3, beat 3, we want to enter the destination at the exact same place. And then sometimes you actually want to control what happens in between those. Maybe you want to write some transitions that might live in the middle of that. So all these different options for transitioning between a game state. And so I think that's really reminds me a lot of the quantization chooser in Ableton Live. You think about, if I set it to one bar, then it's going to wait for the end of that bar to switch to the next clip or whatever. So I'm trying to make some connections between middleware and then also Ableton Live here. And so one of the things that we think about when we're thinking about interactive music is how can we make a small amount of material variable enough so that it doesn't get super boring to the listener, right? Because you think about, okay, well, in a story mode game, maybe it's going to last for 5 to 10 hours, 15 hours, kind of at the most. Most AAA video games have a story that kind of limits that amount of time, right? And then you have other games that are multiplayer. And so that might, you think of like your friend that plays Call of Duty every night for 2 hours. And across a year, that's 1,000 hours of music that they might have heard at that time. And then you also have to think how much source material of music, we're hiring a composer to build. And oftentimes it's not very much. It's like 1 or 2 hours of musical composition. And how do we deliver that in a way that doesn't make you want to pull your hair out, right? That doesn't make you want to go crazy. And so this is what music variability is all about here. How do we make that work? So obviously the composition is key, and you all are probably mostly composers that are listening out there. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. The sound engine from the actual middleware can give you some variability, and then the game mechanics itself. So how does the game play affect the actual music? So let's look quickly at the composition. Some ideas to consider is if you used varied tempos for different locations in the game or something like that, that makes it kind of variable and fun to listen to. If you avoid rhythmic patterns, that will be really helpful. If you can think of like don, 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 don. If you heard that pattern over and over and over for 4 hours, you would turn the audio off, right? And then using different time signatures, not just 4/4 time, can also be a really big differentiator between this repetitiveness, right? How do we get away from repetitiveness? Then you think about the sound engine. What can the actual device do to help with variability? Obviously, you can change the pitch, you can transpose things, maybe volumes can come up and down, you can add DSP effects with reverbs and things like that. And then within our melodies and harmonies, we can actually randomize those melodies or sequence or switch those melodies or harmonies. But really, it all starts with the ability to have music segments that can loop gracefully. So let's look at what a looping segment might look like in a middleware program. I love this picture. This is George Crumb's The Magic Circle of Infinity sheet music, and clearly he's thinking about loops here, right? So let's look at what looping segments look like in a middleware program like Wise. So the old way before Wise that this could be done is you would take in this case, an 8-bar segment of music, and then oftentimes you'd have some type of ending here at the end, right? Where maybe you have a cymbal crash and it fades away. And so there wasn't an easy way to get that to play when you were looping. So what we would do in the past is we would clip the tail and then copy it back over to the beginning and kind of allow that to happen. And there is an option in Ableton Live to do that, right? So if you choose render as loop in your export window, that bounces the leftover tails to the beginning of the loop. So it does do that. Now, of course, if that was a cymbal crash and it happens every 8 bars, you're going to get real tired of that cymbal crash. So that's not necessarily the easiest and most effective way to loop segments. So looping within Wise, they give you the option of building an entire audio file here that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we can tell the program where the entry and the exits are. And as a result, we can include pickups and releases or pre-entries and post-exits, right? And so when we combine those two, when we combine all that together in a segment of the same piece of music, then we can say, okay, let's use the exit and entry points as sync points. So it's literally not looping. It's playing one segment, then another segment with some crossover between the two, like kind of like a fade, right? It's kind of like automatically fading between those. So if we had 3 segments, you can imagine that happening again and again and again. What gets really fun is when you're actually branching with different segments. So let's say, for example, we had segment A, segment B, and segment C. Those are going to automatically include the tails and the beginnings of these different segments, and they'll play over top of each other, making really nice, kind of seemingly nice crossfades here. So if you wanted to do that inside of Ableton Live, you have the ability to do that, of course, but also if you wanted to consider, okay, how do I render each track that I have in Live as individual outputs, right? So that's an option when you render your tracks. And then also, if you have reverbs or delays or anything that might be adding a little bit of sound towards the end of a cue, you can choose include the return and master effects in your exports. So then you get all of those effects included in what you export. So this might be a really nice way to export from Ableton Live if you're coming into a middleware program like Wise. So when you bring this all into Wise, obviously we were just looking at a stereo track, but in this case, I've got, 5 different stereo tracks that are showing. And again, with the entry and exit cues, we can determine kind of where this segment is going to start and stop. You can still see the pickup and post exits here. So the next kind of piece to the puzzle is, you might say, well, we were talking about the taxation on the CPU when you are playing audio in a game and how important it is to try and keep that to a minimum. Why would we want to play 5 stereo tracks instead of 1 stereo track? And receiving information from the game that then can modify the audio starts to become a really good reason for that. So let's look at that and how that might work. If with real-time parameter controls, or RTPC, we can actually utilize this information that could be coming from the game, right? So let's imagine that on our x-axis we're looking at volume, and our y-axis we're looking at a game parameter called stealth factor. So in other words, you're hiding from, let's say you're hiding from an alien, and as you get closer to the alien, the stealth factor number goes up. And of course, the game is going to be computing this information, right? In a real-time situation, it's going to be computing what the stealth factor is. So all we want to do is receive that information from the game and then have the audio react to it. So in this case, you can see in this RTPC display, we could grab that stealth factor, a little red control there at the top, and move that to the left and right and really see kind of what is going on and hear that in real time. So what is this going to do in real time? I've got a little video that'll show that here.
I'm in Wise, and I have attached on 2 of the tracks, I have attached an RTPC, a game parameter. So that's my stealth factor on the x-axis, and it's driving the volume. So in real time, the game is actually just modulating this value, as it does for the AI, and it could sound like that. You're in the dark. You're exposed.
So that's like kind of showing you in real time from Wise what that can really do. And you could hear the kind of like the difference there between maybe it was a reverb that was added once you were exposed, right? And so once you get that kind of interactivity going between the middleware software and the game, then we can continue adding more musical variability by adding tracks and subtracks. So what does that look like? Here's an example where we have 4 different bass tracks and 3 different brass tracks and a couple of different piano tracks down at the bottom. Now there's multiple ways that we can control this variability. So for example, we could randomize the 4 different bass lines. Or we could say, I want the 3 brass lines that I have here to sequence between brass 1, brass 2, brass 3, brass 1, brass 2, brass 3. So that adds some variability. And then on this piano track, we could say, well, let's actually react to what's happening in the game again with this. Let's switch which piano track is going to play back depending on what the game information is sending us. So you think about Mario here. You know that Mario can be small or tall or shoot out fireballs. Well, maybe that could be the switch, right? So you could choose your piano track based upon that information that you're receiving back from the game. And I think this kind of reminds me of follow actions in Ableton Live. I recognize follow actions is a pretty advanced concept for Ableton Live, but if you've been using it for long enough, you understand that this is a cool way to randomize which clips are playing in a column in a certain track. or decide I want to play the next one, or I want to play the last one in a congruent group of clips. So this kind of reminds me of the same type of ideas, whether you want to randomize or sequence or use a switch to determine which one of these clips is playing in a middleware. And of course, this is going to work with MIDI as well. You can use rendered audio, but you can also do this with MIDI, and that makes it really fun because then you could have a filter sweep that's dependent on what information you're receiving from the game, for example. And of course, it's pretty low CPU generally if you're using those type of things too. So how do we get even more musical variability? We can put those segments that we just looked at into a playlist. And so now we have some randomizations, some switching, some whatnots as a segment, and then we can have 5 of those, right? 5 different ones of those that then again can be sequenced or randomized. So now we are starting to see a much larger amount of variability that's available to you. Additionally, we can also use a switch to determine which playlist we're going to be playing from. You remember we were talking about game state A and game state B. Well, the switch will determine which playlist we're going to take from. Then we have multiple segments under that can be variable, and then of course the tracks inside of those segments. So you're starting to see that we can add a lot of variability based on these kind of controls in a middleware software. Now, let's look finally at game mechanics. I think that game mechanics reminds me a lot of basic musical forms. So in other words, if you are wanting your music to be organized in a certain way, we can take that information from the game itself, and that becomes the musical form. So looking at kind of classic musical forms that we might all be familiar with, let's think about in classical music. We've got the rondo form, right? We've got sonata allegro form, so things that you've kind of maybe related to in a classical music world, or maybe you're a blues player. All hail Chicago, right? And you've got the 1-4-1-1 kind of idea of chord structures. Or maybe you're a rock and roller and you're used to intro, verse, chorus, verse, solo, right? Or if you're a pop songwriter, you just take the solo out of that different form. And so those represent kind of classic musical forms that we're used to. Well, what about when you look at the form of a game, right? So what are some typical interactive musical forms? Here's an example of a sequence or a horizontal type of interactive musical form where maybe you start at the introduction, you go to the first stage. If you are successful with the stage 1, then you might have a transition and move on to stage 2, et cetera, all the way to victory. And of course, anytime you lose, you might go down to defeat and back to stage 1. So that's an example of some horizontal sequencing ideas from a game. And that reminds me almost a perfect analog of Ableton Live's arrangement view. That's music laid out in a linear song timeline, much like a multi-track tape. And Elliot's going to show you how he has used the arrangement view to organize certain sections of his composition in Ableton Live to export in this way, right? So obviously, we're thinking about the same kind of horizontal sequencing techniques found here. And I've tried to include a couple little graphics maybe you recognize from Ableton Live up on the top right there, representing that. Now, talking about Dennis DeSantis, who is an Ableton employee. He writes the manual for Ableton Live. And he also wrote a fantastic book, if you haven't seen it, called Making Music, 74 Creative Strategies. And that's available online for free in multiple formats, PDF, EPUB, etc. So I highly encourage you to check out that book. And one thing
link
he
in
says
the comments
here is
for everyone.
There you go. Very cool. I use that book all the time when I'm teaching. It's so useful. But contrast is created through layering, right? The careful addition and subtraction of parts in order to change the density of the underlying texture. So this would be a second type of interactive musical form, is layering. Now, I wanted to highlight one of our Chicago-based musicians who is also an Ableton Live user. That's Nathan Pierre Jones, better known as DJ Pierre, right? And so if you think back to his seminal acid house track called Acid Tracks from 1987, he has done some pretty effective layering here. So I'm going to let this play for about a minute or so, and you can kind of watch on the timeline that I've included down there, these elements start to be layered onto this track. And I think this will probably be a pretty common technique that you have used in your own compositions. So this kind of spreadsheet-oriented timeline analysis is something that I assign to a lot of students in kind of EDM type of classes. I think it's a fun way to visualize what's happening in classic tracks. And of course, you can take that right into the DAW and recreate the same type of blueprint for a composition to match that. So I think it's always fun to show that off in that way. But you can see that he's clearly layering a bunch of different sounds on top of each other in the first minute and a half of that track. And so that is a very clear emulation of what can happen in interactive music. So here's an example of some different layering techniques where maybe you start off in this exploration mode, right? Where the sound is always playing, and then you start to enter a danger zone with if you get threat greater than 40%, and that will modulate track volumes. In other words, bringing in different tracks to layer on top. And then finally you get into the battle scene and your threat level is super high and you've added all these sounds on top of each other, right? And so what does that look like in kind of like a graph form? Well, you can imagine, again, level 1 all the way up to level 6. And what can that look like while you're actually playing? This is an example from a game called Alien Isolation. And so you can imagine that as you're playing the game, you're slowly going up and down in these levels. And that kind of represents what layers of sound might be included, right? And also to kind of like let you know that you are approaching a new level, you can add what they call a stinger sound. So that might be like a brass hit or some kind of like sharp sound that lets you know, oh, something's about to happen. Like, get ready for this, right? So obviously you wouldn't want to stay in level 6 very long because clearly that's like super aggressive. That's a lot of different sounds happening at the same time. So that would like appear and then disappear pretty quickly, so that you wouldn't get kind of overwhelmed with that quantity of sounds happening. So I want to show literally what this sounds like from the Alien Isolation game. So let's check it out. Let's see what that's going to sound like. Here we go.
Just trying to find out what that is. You will not find it next time. There. I'll collect my things and we can leave.
So pretty exciting stuff there. So that's a good example, I think, of how layering can be used to enhance the gameplay. You heard probably some stingers in there, some brass hits, letting you know that you were getting close to that alien and it was about to show up, right? So that's kind of a fun example. But even modern games like Rockstar Games' Red Dead Redemption 2, which I think came out in the past 2 years, is using the same exact layering style. The entire soundtrack of that game is composed in 130 BPM and in the key of A minor. So they're using things like horses generate a bass line, and chases generate timpani sounds, and shootouts generate electric guitars. So that type of layering is still in play in modern game production. I think it's fascinating that entire game is at the same BPM, at the same
That's
key.
nuts. That's really.
I know, you could kind of
great.
see like how cool that is and how effective layering just by itself can be, right? And so I want to show another example from a game called Galax Z, where the composer Andrew Rohrman, who is known as Scientific, organized sounds and real-time parameter controls from the game on Ableton Live Session Grid. So here's an example in Novation Launchpad. When I show the video of how he's actually performing this, he's going to be performing it with a push instrument, but you can see like on the horizontal level, he has maybe what you might consider like the different achievements or different levels, the different layers, so different areas of the game. And then on the vertical axes, he's got the actual sounds. So it's similar to tracks, right? Those are our tracks that would be represented. So here he goes.
The idea is set the tone. You know, you drop into a new level. Well, this is pretty cool, but there might be some danger. So you're floating around. You can add parts to it, up at intensity or not. But maybe the player, since we're not, they can totally roam freely. Maybe they do just shoot out into space and they don't get into a fight. So then we go back to this, and it's just mellow, and they're running around shooting asteroids. No big deal. So yeah, mellow, but maybe you are even out in the asteroid field and you come across some bugs. So the bugs engage. They've got a little synth that says, okay, you're fighting bugs. Maybe the action ramps up. Yeah, here's the thing. I can hold it. We can just okay. So anyway, so there's some more action. Maybe the bugs come back. You're fighting them. It's going all right, but then some pirates show up. And that's going well. Then maybe kill all the bugs. Pirates can kill all the bugs. Now you're just fighting them. Okay, beat up all the pirates. Okay, good. But it's still intense. The battle's still going on. Killing your last few enemies. And then, a little relief. Okay, we've got some downtime. We've maybe shooting around the caves still. Maybe there's a few things left to do. But the action has dropped down a notch. Again, tons of options here. Maybe you've accomplished whatever the level mission is. It's done, so there's a little kind of victory dance for you. And you're leaving the caves and back into the asteroid field. And so that's an example, very condensed, and again, me kind of talking through it, how the system works.
So I really love that example because it shows right inside of Ableton Live, utilizing a push, how you can compose music inside of Ableton that can then be taken into a middleware software and implemented, right? So you compose with the intention of exporting it in that way. And so just to recap what we've been talking about, we talked about game mechanics and how we're maybe moving from one state to the other. We might have a story that's in the middle of that, and then how we transition between. We talked about music variability and how there are three kind of main elements that can provide variability. Then we also talked about two different forms, so sequencing versus layering, and how those kind of relate to Ableton Live's session and arrangement views. And if you're inspired to learn middleware, one of the things that I wanted to point out right off the bat, and I love showing that example from Galaxy, is that you might already be composing in live in a way that can transition into middleware, right? So many of the compositional techniques that you're already using, similar structures in Ableton, can be used here. Second, it doesn't have to be a roadblock learning middleware. It can be even an inspiration if you think about writing this way. Maybe you're kind of tired of the way that you've been composing for the past 15 years. And so this gives you another kind of idea of how to create little sections of your compositions that can come together in a way like that. And then just like an instrument, the only way to learn is practice. And you can download all of these middleware softwares that we're talking about today for free and try them all out. So might as well, right? And there's the quote from Dale Crowley one more time. Finally, if you are interested in getting certified in Wise, I am available to help you through that process. And so it does give you the opportunity to be listed on the creators directory at Wise at audiokinetic.com. and etc. So if you want to reach out to me, there's my email address, and I'm happy to help you through that. And finally, here's just a list of references that I would recommend. So if you're interested in learning more about interactive music, I want to give a shout out to Simon Ashby, who is a VP at Audio Kinetic, for his insight and assistance in helping me develop this presentation. And I'm open to any questions, but I'm also ready to turn it over to Elliot and hear what he has to say. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Oh yeah, thank you, Graham. That was awesome. That was inspiring. I could see like a lot of ways you can borrow from this, even if you're not producing for a video game. Like I could see building up like a live set where you have parts that maybe you pick a BPM, pick a key, you can bring stuff in, take stuff out, and really take the whole crowd on a journey while you're performing something live like that. I think there's a lot of opportunity for inspiration and kind of crossover with these techniques.
Absolutely.
And you really
composing, if you're already composing in Ableton Live, it's very likely that you can take what you're doing and bring it into this kind of environment.
Awesome. Anyone in the chat, does anyone have any questions for Graham before we switch things up a little bit? Now is your chance. Get those questions in. If not, we'll have some time. If you don't get them in soon, we'll have a little bit of time after Elliot's presentation. And one question, is there a link to this presentation? You're looking at it right now. It's on Facebook Live. You can just rewind it anytime. Yeah, so this is going to stay up on Facebook. I'm probably going to also upload it on YouTube if you guys want to rewatch it later. Another question comes in from Carol M. Does the composer need to be able to read the developer's code in order to place the appropriate audio segments, or do the developers do that?
So if you were going to receive real-time parameter controls from the game itself, you would definitely want to know what that parameter is named in the game so you're correctly kind of getting in and out. But I think a lot of what Elliot's going to show off might have to do with that specific question. So I'm gonna turn it over to him. He has a lot of cool stuff. So I was showing things in a middleware program called Wise, and Elliot is going to show off a middleware program called Fmod, which has been around for a long time and is super cool as well.
Awesome, great questions, you guys. And right now, I'd like to introduce Elliot Callighan. What's going on, Elliot? How you doing tonight?
I'm good, Orville. Thanks for having me. And Graham, I don't know, that was awesome, man. Good job.
Thanks. Appreciate you.
So, Elliot, give us a little bit of background on what do you do at music? What's your past? What's your present look like? What's your future? And then let's jump into your presentation. We're right on schedule right now, so we're doing good.
Sure. Well, first off, I just want to say that we're all at home and my cats are awesome, but they always want to show their affection at the worst time. So be prepared for some cats to jump in the video here. But I started playing violin when I was 4, piano at 8, guitar at 12, considered becoming a professional violinist, decided against that. Originally went to school for architecture and was very, very mediocre at it. But I met my wife while I was there, so definitely not a mistake. I ended up dropping out, enlisting in the Army National Guard, and long story short, got a couple degrees in music composition and sound design. And ever since then, I've been teaching film and game courses at DePaul University. I've also worked in TV, commercials, film, and trailers. I'm also a huge metalhead, so if you take, metal aesthetics plus, a classical music background and education, you put those things together, that's trailer music, right?
Yeah.
So I've been doing that, but the last 2 years I've really focused on game music. It was always something that I was working on, but decided to focus on that within the last 2 years, and now just building that business and still teaching and trying to grow the game audio and music program at DePaul, and also still serving in the military, which is the only reason I have short hair. It used to be beautiful. Not that it isn't beautiful now, but it's a different kind of beautiful, I guess.
Awesome.
Yeah. If there's nothing that's popped in the chat, I'll start sharing my screen and go through some stuff.
Yeah, let's check out some stuff.
All right. I'm going to share the screen here. And are you able to see the Adobe deck here?
Yep.
PDF?
Looking
Okay.
good.
Great. Awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my career path and describe how I basically flailed around to end up where I am now, and talk a bit about a day-to-day, like what a typical day looks like working in games and teaching and whatnot. And then I'll jump into some current projects that I'm involved with that I think will help illustrate a lot of the concepts that Graham was describing. So, Elliot Callighan, about what I do. I'm a composer and sound designer. I'm the CEO of Unlock Audio. We do all audio, music, and implementation, so literally all audio tasks for games. I've released a number of albums as the electronic artist from MOVA, and I'm faculty at DePaul University in the film and game programs, teaching audio and music courses to students there. And I'm also a captain in the Army National Guard. I've actually been in for a total of 12 years now, which sounds nuts to say out loud. So going way back, I've always been really, really cool, as you can see from the photos here. That's me in high school orchestra class and doing a bit of kind of like a coffee shop open mic thing that we did after school in the lower right. And when my family basically said, you cannot be a professional musician, that is a dead end and you can't do it. I originally went to school for architecture at IIT on the south side of Chicago. So you can see some of the things that I was involved with there. On the right is my first year project. And on the left, I think I was just goofing around in someone else's project. But the whole time that I was in school, and again, being very mediocre at it, I was really focused on and living this completely separate life. Up there on the top right, that's me before a metal show for a band that I was in, trying very hard at the time. I also played a bunch of electronic sets. The other person on stage with me in the lower right there is a guy named Mike Else, who goes by Professor Click. So if anyone wants to hear some awesome electronic big beat, definitely check him out. Click is spelled K-L-I-Q. Played in metal bands, and I was also a huge gamer and nerd the whole time. In the top left, that is my cousin's wedding, and yes, it was a Star Wars wedding where he was Han Solo and she was Princess Leia, and it was all of the awesome that you think it was. Yes, it was all of those things. So after I went to school for architecture for a few years, I realized I really would never forgive myself if I didn't actually pursue music and audio and figure out a way to do this. So I dropped out, and my family basically said, well, if this is what you want to do, you're going to have to figure it out. And my solution was to enlist in the Army National Guard. I'd always had a reverence and curiosity for it. And I said, well, this is something that can make my education possible. It can make it possible for me to pursue my dream. And at the same time, I can do something that I'm really proud of and can get a great sense of fulfillment from it. So on the left is my dad, the day that I graduated basic training. And I wrote to him in a letter because at least at that time, you weren't able to talk to anyone from home over the phone. You could only do it by letters. And I said to him, hey, when you come see me, like, please bring my guitar. I miss it so much. So I'm in my class A's there with my acoustic guitar there as well. And then there's a couple guys that went through basic with me in the lower right. Best shape of my life. When I got home after that, I stuck to the plan, and I went to school for music composition here at Columbia College in Chicago. Went through the music composition program, and at the end of it, I realized, yeah, I have all these really cool skills and this knowledge that I've wanted my entire life, but how do I, make a living doing this? And just being a composer in and of itself, there are definitely avenues that you can pursue, but I found myself being really intrigued by music from media, film, games, and all that sort of stuff. And especially from being in music school, that was where my focus really started to go. That was the music that really got me excited, on top of all of the metal and screaming and dissonance as well. So I went to DePaul for a master's program in cinema audio production, where we looked at actual recording techniques. We looked at the actual audio of things, as opposed to, say, the composition and music of things. So to be able to combine all of those different skill sets together is what you need to really be able to create a finished track that someone plays in a film, in a game, or plays back on Spotify. At the same time, I was also going through an ROTC program at DePaul. Part of me just really latched onto a lot of the military culture and feel of that environment. It's funny, all of my military friends think I'm the weird, nerdy game audio and music guy, and then all of my music and game friends think I'm the ultra strict black and white military dude. So I guess, I don't know, I either don't fit in anywhere, or I like sort of fit in everywhere, but it's where I like to live. After I completed my master's, I had some military commitments that I had to fulfill. So I actually went away for about 9 months. And it was kind of a, very shocking experience, because at that point, I had been enlisted for about 5 years. So I went in as a private first class, ended up as a sergeant, and then received my commission and went away to this other military school. And I don't know if anyone in the chat has any military experience, but when you're enlisted, and especially when you're junior enlisted, they're cramming you in everywhere like sardines. You don't have any personal space. You are a number, and you just got to go. But as an officer, they refer to it as a gentleman's course. So I was actually able to be at a military school and have my own room and have a hotel room, which just blew my mind when I was on base and had that for the first time. But during the day, I was in school for logistics, Army logistics. So part of that is just all the systems that they use to track everything, as well as general leadership. But at the same time, we also did a lot in terms of analyzing what could happen. And bear in mind, this was also a number of years ago, where IEDs were a great threat. Not that they aren't anymore, but that was really where the Army was focused on. So we did a lot of looking at how do you react to certain situations when you're out, deployed somewhere. So you can see some of the situations that we looked at and analyzed in the top left. I would always be going on tons of ruck marches and getting all sweaty and digging holes to sleep in and all that kind of stuff for 9 months. And then whenever I go back to my hotel room, I would be teaching myself all of this game audio and music software that I've been fascinated by. So again, everyone else in my class thought I was this audio and music nerd recluse person. And I guess they were right, but that's essentially where I taught myself a ton of software that I use that's specific to games, because when you're on a military base in the middle of kind of nowhere, there's not a whole lot else to do. So I was like, oh, let's just dive into this stuff. After I came home, I pursued anything and everything that I could in terms of audio and music. And this meant commercials, this meant trailers, this meant film, and it definitely included games. Over the last 2 years, I've decided to focus on games, but games were always just a thing that I was doing in addition to everything else. So I was making tons of trips to Los Angeles and San Francisco and Austin and Atlanta and all these kind of hubs for all of the different industries that I was trying to find a foothold in. I ended up giving a talk to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra about writing music for games. And it was very different than kind of what we're covering tonight. Tonight, it's a lot more about almost the logistical and pragmatic aspects of it. How do you get this stuff to work, and what are the options? The talk at the Chicago Symphony was about how do you take a video game and try and extract some sort of aesthetic and feeling and emotion for it and write that type of music. And then I also stayed in touch with a couple professors at DePaul that I had. And when I came home, I just pinged them and said, hey, I'd love to grab coffee. And someone who was slated to teach some courses that upcoming term basically canceled last minute. And they said, do you want to teach a course? I said, sure. And it's just kind of grown from there. They were having a faculty meeting one day and said, yeah, it'd be great if we could get someone who did like music and audio for games. And I just raised my hand. I was like, I mean, I know that stuff. And they were like, what? So now I basically run the vast majority of the curriculum for all of that at DePaul.
That's how they lured you in there, Elliot. That's how they got you.
Yeah, right.
Making you sit in meetings. That's how they got you.
Exactly. But from all of the trips out west and you know, all of the efforts that I was making, you know, it was really difficult because I wanted to live in Chicago. Like, this is home. I love it. And LA is great, cool, and awesome, but Chicago is home. So I was devoting a lot of time, a lot of resources to going out west and staying in touch with people. And I had blips of success, such as working on the trailer campaign for Spider-Man Far From Home. But I think this might be a good segue into the next slide. Let's hope I'm right. But eventually, I decided to focus on games because I was actually getting the most opportunity in games, even though I wasn't pursuing it as much as all of these other industries. And I also realized that for myself personally, I got the most excited when there was a game opportunity for me to work on, because I feel that there's so much unexplored territory in games. That medium is so young compared to a lot of others that involve audio and music. So there's just a lot more undiscovered opportunity, both professionally and artistically. So I started Unlock Audio, and we do all audio for games. It's not just me, it's about me and 6 or 7 other people, depending on what we're working on and what's on the docket. But most of us are based in Chicago or just outside Chicago. We do have some folks that are in Seattle. We've got someone that's actually in France, but the majority of us are in the Chicago area. And our goal is to act as a full, complete audio department that usually AAA, high budget studios have at their disposal. And we aim to bring that to high tier indie and AA developers. So music composition, production, it's sound design, it's voice casting, as well as directing and editing, and it's the implementation of it as well. When we're talking about how we want to construct the music and audio for a game, you have to think about implementation, because like Graham was saying, there's not a defined timeline the vast majority of the time. And in games, again, it's not necessarily like a film where it's a conversation between the director and then a timeline and then you go. There are a lot of things that music could be doing, that could be reacting to it. And certain things may be important or less important at other times throughout the game. So you really need to know what those priorities are, what the options are to reinforce those priorities, how they change, and then how you actually execute all of those things once you've had those conversations. So you can see a number of things that our team has worked with. I was fortunate to write the soundtrack for the most recent Trackmania by Ubisoft Medeo that came out this past summer. But another composer on our team, John Robert Matz, also wrote the soundtrack for Fossil Echo, which was the winner of the Best Interactive Score in 2017. But we do a lot of cool stuff and it's fun. And I like showing this slide. And we're also partnered with Periscope Post and Audio here in Chicago on the near south side. And Periscope focuses on linear media. They did all the audio and music for the TV show Empire, but we're partnered with them so that now if anything that they're working on has a interactive component to it, we're the team that comes on that facilitates that and contributes for game projects and things like that. And in return, we get to work out in super cool, swanky studios like the one on the top right. So I never expected to go through this series of events. If you would have asked me when I was younger, I probably would have said, yeah, I'll just be in a metal band that somehow eclipses Metallica and will take over the world. But this is what ended up happening. And I couldn't be happier that it played out this way. And I just wanted to go through this and show this because I think a lot of people have the idea of, there's a path that they have to go along, and if they stray from that path, they've messed up. But the reality is that like there is no set path for a career like this. Everybody is flailing around, trying to find their own space, trying to find their own way to make it possible. And that means that there's no wrong answer per se. There's things that are right for you, and you just got to do what makes sense for you and who you are. But don't ever wonder or think that you're doing things wrong or that you're wasting your time. As long as you feel like you're making progress and you're happy, like that's what matters. So a typical day of mine working for Unlock Audio looks like this. And I just know enough about myself and how I tend to work that I have all of the creative work in the afternoon. I am not a morning person whatsoever. Like if it was completely up to me, I would go to bed at 3 or 4 a.m. every night and wake up at 11 or noon, because that's just how I am. So one, I would say definitely figure that out about yourself when you are the most productive. But I know that that's how I operate, so I structure my day that way. In the morning, it is tons of emails, it's tons of business development, it's research about different developers and maybe looking at their activity and whether they're actively looking for something. And maybe if they're actively looking for certain positions, maybe they're also looking for music and audio. Maybe it's about generating social media content. Maybe it's about filling out everything in QuickBooks and invoicing and all of that incredibly sexy stuff, right? But all of that very necessary, very important stuff happens in the morning for me. I then have a 2-hour lunch break, which is, again, very important for me. I know that I want that 2 hours off. And then in the afternoon and evening, that's when I do all of the creative work. So I may be looking at the structure of gameplay from a developer and thinking about how music can reinforce that and what implementation systems would be best to use for that. I might be writing music itself or mixing or recording myself or someone else. And I also may be listening to assets that other people on my team have put together for projects that we're working on before sending them off to clients. But for people that are interested in game audio and music and just general music careers, especially as a composer, 3 big tips that I want to say is, 1, make sure that you have processes and systems in place and that you are ruthlessly adhering to what those are. The biggest thing that I hear from a lot of people is, yeah, I was going to do this, or I'm totally going to do it next week, or that's when I'm going to do it. And, frankly, talk is incredibly cheap. And there are a lot of people that love to talk and nobody cares. People care about what you do and what you've done. So put those systems in place. Force yourself to do it when it's uncomfortable and when you don't want to do it. All of the unsexy parts of what you do make all the really fun and creative things possible. So look at it as an opportunity and make sure that you put as much time into all of that as you do into your music and your mixes and all of the stuff that I think initially excited a lot of us to get involved. You know, people want to hire you because they're your friend and they know about you. So be as strict about developing your relationships with those people and have those systems in place as making sure that you have good composition and production chops. Second point there, your skill is only 1/3 of why. I would almost update and say this is maybe 1/4 or 1/5 of why. Everything else around what you do and who you are determines whether or not someone will listen to what you can do in the first place. I think a lot of us, when we're thinking about this career and in school, we think, yeah, once I get to a certain level of good and quality, like people are just going to want to work with me because I'm so good at what I do. And that is just frankly wrong. There are tons of people that are reasonably good at what they do, but they excel at being present in the industry, helping others, and making sure that their portfolio and awareness is top of mind for everyone. And I would also say that, you know, being in a creative discipline, you know, only the exceptional are able to do this at all. So you also need to be ruthlessly critical with yourself. Like, hey, if I'm not really close to what AAA movie studios are putting out, I really need to get my chops up because I don't have a chance otherwise. But different brands that you're involved with, your portfolio, the relationships that you have with people, other organizations that you're tied with, how easy it is for people to find you, and then mutual contacts that you have. All of those things play as much, if not more, of a role in finding you work than how good you are at what you do. And then lastly, that war of attrition. What I said about don't worry about whether or not you're doing things right. There is no right way. Do not give up. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to conferences like GDC. I've been, I think, 6 times now, and there's always a crop of people who will be there 1 year. If this is truly what you love doing, don't be there just 1 year. These things take time. They take a lot of time, and it's part of the sacrifice that you have to commit to doing if you want to pursue a career like this. You have to know and have the confidence and want to delay gratification. It's going to be a while till you get your break. All right. That's okay. Stick it out. As soon as you get one opportunity, it'll take less time for the next one to come, less time for the one after that, so on and so forth. It's a snowball. So with that, Orville, if there are any questions that have popped up in the chat, I'd be happy to answer them about a little biz dev and maybe my background, or if there are no questions, I can bring up a couple sessions that I think will help illustrate all the stuff that Graham was talking about.
Yeah, if you want to pull up a session now, now's while you're pulling it up, this is a good opportunity. Does anyone have any business related questions for Elliot? I have a question for you, kind of on that topic. Let's say that, so like you, what are the steps? Let's say if I'm a music producer, but I want to get into video games. What are the next steps? Like, is it important just to go in and learn master Fmod, master Ableton, be able to write music? Is that it takes, or do you need more, I guess, under your more skills, I guess, under your belt before you even approach a company like yours to work with?
Yeah, so in terms of audio and music skills, I would definitely say that for games, it's quickly, if it's not there already, you really need to know these game-specific tools such as audio middleware. You need to know how you can design different audio events. You need to know how you can structure music systems. And you know that's for artistic reasons, because that's what's going to help you make the best possible music for a game. But two, especially if you're just starting out, you're probably going to be working with small teams, indie developers, and they're not going to have large budgets. And it may be the first time that they're creating a game, or maybe the second or third time. So any opportunity that they have to, one, cut costs, and two, simplify things, they're going to take. So if you can go to them and say, I can do your sound design, I can cast your voice actors, I can write the music, produce all of it for you, and I can actually help with the implementation of it all. That's what's going to put you in front of anyone else who says they can do only one or two of those things. So yes, definitely no Fmod, definitely no Wise. There are a number of other engines and pieces of audio middleware that are available, but I would say as long as you're at least fluent in Unreal Engine and Unity, and then know Fmod and or Wise, you're in a pretty good spot.
Cool. And it's like, do you need a degree from DePaul or Columbia or like a university degree to get into this, or are these all things that you can teach yourselves?
Yeah, they are all definitely things you can teach yourself. You do not need a degree whatsoever. I feel like a lot of what my education was it made me aware of these options, and then it was completely on me to explore what those options were and develop my own way of working in that. At the same time, school can do a lot to help people that maybe aren't the best at disciplining themselves to follow through and complete things. You need to be able to complete that. I hear too many times in game audio communities and just audio music communities, and there are people joke about, yeah, I'll get to that right after I finish the 5 other projects I'm working on that I've been involved with for the last 6 years. And I'm like, yo, that is the death sentence right there. Like, I don't know, would you pay for a gallon of milk that didn't have the cap on it? Like, it's not done. You wouldn't.
Another thing that I think that you might also kind of harp on here is like, you need to have a passion for video games, right? I mean, like, we all kind of get to this place where we have a passion for house music, or we have a passion for, hip hop. And that carries over when you talk to people about getting a job, about that kind of thing. I always say that the music industry thrives on new blood, right? And so we get complacent in the places that we are. And when you meet somebody like Elliot, who is so enthusiastic about video games and the audio for video games, it kind of rubs off on other people. So all of a sudden you feel that passion and you want to work with Elliot because of his passion.
Heck yeah. Thanks, man.
Awesome. Well said. Well, Elliot, can you show us a little bit of Fmod action, maybe, and just kind of break down, just so we could see a little bit of the back end of what this stuff actually looks like from a practical perspective of implementation?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, here, because this is an Ableton event, I do want to draw it back to Ableton because 1, I love Ableton, and 2, this is their event. But I primarily write in Ableton, like all music. Here is a session for a current project. And this is for a desert area. It's been open for a little over an hour, and it's, I don't know how many tens of gigabytes of samples here. So if this is a little sluggish, I apologize. But just so you can hear, this all started from writing the music in Ableton. And you can see a number of Middle Eastern instruments here on the right. So just to illustrate, I'm starting this whole process in Ableton. This is where I'm writing the music. You see I've got all these different layers and instruments going on here. And then once I have all this, I'm bouncing out almost all of these as individual stems. Some of them I'm grouping together, and I'll explain a bit why once we get into Fmod. But here is the project in Fmod. So in games, you are creating the sound assets, the music assets, the stems, and then you're also typically, especially as a composer, designing what's called interactive music systems or audio and music events. So on the engine side, that translates to a programmer making this event trigger or happen when a certain thing happens in the game. There can be a whole slew of possibilities of what determines that, when that happens, all that kind of stuff. But once that event is triggered, then the engine does all of the stuff that I'm designing and creating here in Fmod. So in this particular event, we're in a desert area of this side-scrolling platformer. And here's the main gameplay loop. You can see I've got a ton of different groups here, strings 1, 2, perk 1, 2, and I've got all of these separated into individual clips. And one of the things that Graham was talking about is that when we're in games, we have a limited amount of resources available to us. And that's true from both a CPU and RAM standpoint, but also in terms of just the raw amount of data. We cannot necessarily have 10 or thousands of hours of music, right? So how can we take a relatively small amount of musical content and add variation and kind of mask the fact that we are repeating things? So here, it's a very simple solution. There are certain audio files here that are playing every time that this loops, and the majority of things you see here are actually randomized. So if I select this one here and pop this out, you can see that it has a probability on and has a chance of 70%. So 70% of the time that this plays back, this one particular audio clip will play back as well. 30% of the time it won't. And that's what's happening for all of these instruments here. So even though it's the same piece of music, it still ebbs and flows and feels like it's changing and avoids ear fatigue because we're not hearing the exact same thing over and over again. So quickly, I'll play this, it'll loop, and you can see different clips light up if they've been triggered and we're actually hearing them back. But just to illustrate it, if I play this back immediately, we should hear different instruments slightly different every time. So here we had that main melodic line of the woodwinds there that was in that last time I played it back, that wasn't in there the 2 previous times. So it's just constantly changing that way. So that's one randomization. 2, in this game, side-scrolling platformer, but there's also a bit of combat, so you can be fighting enemies. And we have this parameter up here, an RTPC, like Graham was describing, for combat intensity. And if there are at least 2 enemies near you and your health drops below, I think 20 or 25%, I'm not sure exactly which, the value of this parameter goes up. And I'll just hit play and you can hear what that does. So what this parameter does is it makes it so we can actually hear this particular stem, which is just all these stabbing strings that are giving greater intensity to that moment, because enemies are attacking you and you're almost dead. You know, it should be intense. Like, let's care about this. I also want to point out, though, that at the same time that it is making this louder, it's also making other elements quieter, so that we don't necessarily have a muddy mix. It doesn't turn into this soupy, incoherent thing. because that's always a concern with mixing in games as well. If you just throw everything in there, well, then nothing really sounds good. So you can make the game do a lot of different things. Even if numbers are going up, you can make them other things go down. Like, the possibilities are endless, but that's one example here. But this is all for just base gameplay in this one level. So that's just kind of the default music that's happening. And this is all happening within a larger music event that I've designed here. And what's going on here is that we're in this desert area and we're hearing that default music, but there are a number of additional events that happen throughout that level. There are a number of cinematics that occur when we reach certain points within the level itself. And we also have a short intro to this music, and we have music that happens when the player actually dies. So you can see a ton of different additional parameters up top here. Again, we've got that combat intensity, but then if we're alive or dead, that determines what we play back. If we're in gameplay as opposed to a cinematic, that determines what plays back as well. And depending on which cinematic we're in, that determines different values for this parameter that determines what we play back. So you can see how crazy complicated and also cool and full of opportunities this can become very quickly. So I'll play it back and play with some of these values here, and you can just hear what happens. Well, that's not good. I can't hear anything. I'm not sure what happened there. Oh, that's why. That's why. So then we can hear combat like usual. But let's say, you know, we're unlucky and we just die while we're playing through the level. And the game loads, and then we respawn, and we're playing again, right?
Nice.
Let's say we get to a point where there's a cinematic that happens in the level. Now this is constructed in such a way where there's a cinematic where we're just seeing visuals and we're hearing voiceover during this part. But we also don't necessarily know how long the player is going to be in this cinematic, because you have to click through every single voice line and it has text reading there, right? So we need to create solutions for what do we do if the player just immediately clicks through, or maybe the player is seeing all of this for the first time. But let's say that they're listening to this for the first time. What we're in right now is the cinematic loop. So this will repeat forever until we complete the cinematic and the player actually clicks through it. At the moment that we actually finish that, we can put this parameter back down to 0 and we'll return to our regular gameplay music. Fades out. We're back into regular gameplay. Now let's say we go to the cinematic and the player is just doing a speed run or something, and they just quickly click through it because they know what's in the cinematic and they don't care. So now we're here again and they're like, click, 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 I don't care. So it's a similar transition, but again, you have to account for all of these possibilities in terms of designing these different audio events. Now, each one of these areas here are 4 different cinematics that are in the level, and they all have a different emotional connotation. The first one that we have here is for kind of a neutral sort of feeling, but I'll just play with this value here so you can hear how some of the other cinematics happen. A bit later in the level, our character basically finds out that his family has been burned alive and it's bad news, so he's pretty pissed. Again, we can do that, go back to regular gameplay. And then we also have other cinematics that are different emotional connotations as well. One is for a sad moment, one is for a happy moment, and that's how we're changing between all of these and still keeping it feeling musical. So that's all for this one, but I also want to bring up another Fmod session because the structure of that gameplay is very different than this. And really, as a composer and audio person in games, this is how you bring a lot of value to a developer, because you can look at how the game is structured and then structure your music accordingly. So for Sheba, we have a level, we're playing it, and we get to cinematics as we're playing through it. However, this is another project where it is an anime title, and this gameplay is structured where you choose an area, and there are 4 within the game. You choose an area, and then you play through relatively small rooms, and these rooms are filled with enemies. And as you defeat enemies, you generate resources that eventually allow you to determine and select to play a boss or then a super boss. So there aren't cinematics in here, so we're not worried about that, but we wanted to communicate this idea of progression and nearing more intense encounters, and also reward players when they do things like beat a boss or a super boss. So here, we've got a main loop for gameplay that we've actually split into 3 segments here. And what we could have done is we could have just put all of them together and just say we just played in a loop, right? Because that's just the traditional thing that we do in games. However, what we did instead was we composed the piece so that this section of the piece is relatively low intensity. This section of the piece is like mid intensity. And then this is the most intense part of that song. And as we play through these rooms and progress through the areas and get close to these boss battles, that's what allows us to then include these sections within the score. If, say, someone is just sitting in a single room and they're not doing well against the enemies, or they're just moving really slow, we will keep looping on just this area by itself. And it's not until we progress far enough that we then allow this to progress to this. I'm saying a lot of things. It's a lot easier if I just hit play. You'll hear what I'm talking about. I also want to take a second and say that in the last session, I created that system and composed all the music. This was a team effort between myself and the other composer on our team, John Robert Matz. He writes incredible music for games, so I want to give a plug to everyone that I think is cool that does the same thing as me. So let's say we're only on room 2 or 3, we haven't progressed too far, so we're not going to include those more intense portions of the music. This will loop back on itself seamlessly. And now we're back at the beginning.
What beautiful recorded sounds there, Elliot. Are those real audio recordings as opposed to virtual instruments?
The brass and the, I believe, recorder are live recorded by John, our other composer.
Gorgeous, it really is.
Yeah, he's a good dude, and he's also good at what he does, which is why I was like, hey, do you want to join this company thing with me?
I'm still waiting to hear the metal guitars, though. Where's all your metal guitars, Elliot?
So let's say at this point, we've played through this grassland area and we've made a fair amount of progress, far enough to where we've changed the value of this parameter to 1. This will now allow the music to move forward and include this section. And once it completes this section, it will then loop back on itself again. You can see this gets a bit of a darker tone. Still in the same aesthetic. For the sake of time, I'm not going to have this loop back on itself again, but if I didn't change any parameters, that's what it would do. It would go back to the beginning. Let's say we've just made a ton of progress, and now we're getting close to the areas like right before these boss and super boss encounters happen. Okay, so now we've played through enough areas or enough rooms in this area, and let's say we have the option to initiate a boss encounter. I'm going to change this parameter and we'll hear what that sounds like. More intense boss encounter, right? Right. Let's say we're just the best at this game. We've beat the boss already. Bring this parameter down. Little interlude that says, you beat them, you won, right? And then the way this game starts is once you do that, you then continue playing through rooms. So we have a short acknowledgement of a win over the boss, and then we're back to our original gameplay. Again, all of the same parameter values and rules for that are still in place at this point. Now let's say we've played through the entire area and we're ready for the super boss, which is like the last boss of the area. So that goes on for a bit. Let's say we beat this super boss.
Epic.
So there we go. And then,
That's awesome, Elliot.
So
So
that-
I got a question for you. When you're writing these kind of boss battles, when things are really intense, how do you know what's too much, right? So like if you're playing the game and like the audio kind of catches your attention more than you might expect or something, is that a problem when you're writing with such like intensity?
I mean, it depends on what the game is. It also depends on the developer and what their intents are. Like one conversation that we had with them recently was that they really wanted that end gesture of you beat the boss or you beat the super boss to stand out a lot more in relation to the general boss and super boss combat music, which was, our solution was, oh, we'll make it 4 decibels louder. And, that was fine. But sometimes that's an aesthetic solution though, where what you wrote isn't quite catching attention in the way that they want. So those are all things that you have to keep in mind, and you have to have a lot of conversations with the developer, because remember, ultimately this is their game and your job is to make their vision happen.
Awesome. We got time for some questions we want to address from the comments before we got to wrap it up for tonight. This question comes from Richard Hall. He asked, in summary, what's the difference between sound design and the music in the game? I guess the question that I can rephrase this. So for all the Foley, all the gunshots, footsteps, broken car explosions, etc., is that traditionally sequenced or I guess programmed in not in Fmod or not in Wise, or is there different software that's used specifically for just all this triggered sounds as opposed to the music composition?
Sure. Well, there's no way that you have to go about it, and you don't even have to use audio middleware. It just gives you a lot of options that aren't as easily achieved through the engine itself and a lot of the native audio tools that are in most engines. So like the project that we're working on, actually the FMOD project that I was just going through, we're using that for VO and music. However, the vast majority of the UI sounds, the vast majority of all the sound effects, like actual attacks and other things, that is all done in the engine itself. So there's no one way that you have to do anything. It's about thinking through what the intent is with the sound and the music, what you need it to do, and then use the correct tool to achieve that. So it can be in middleware, it can be only in the engine. Again, it's just about knowing all of those things, what the options are within each of them, and choosing the right thing for you in the project you're working on.
So does your company typically do both? Does it specialize in one or the other, or is it kind of like an all-around audio and music solution when you get approached to, let's say, do a composition for a video game?
Yeah, we do anything and everything. So myself as a composer, I know how to write music, I know how to mix music, and I know how to create these events in audio middleware. We have people on our team whose only job is to take that FMOD event that I created and make sure it's integrated and works within the game engine itself. So from a developer point of view, they just tell me what they want, and then we make it happen in every sense of the word.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I think it should be said also that in theory, you could write compositions right inside of the game engines. With the reason that we're really using middleware is it makes it easier. You know, it makes it more possible for us to kind of separate ourselves from the programmers and say, I want to have this type of control and this kind of interactivity within my composition that I can be involved in, but I also want to hand it off to you in a very convenient way so that you can implement it fairly easily into a game engine like Unity or Unreal. You don't have to compose and use a middleware, but I think that for a lot of us, it makes it easier to feel like we have a big part in the composition and interactivity without having to take over the programmer. And also, if you imagine, like, if you're working on a pretty big game, it helps to have that clear division of you're in charge of the game engine and I'm going to deliver this music and sound effects to you in a middleware program, and then you implement it. So that way I don't have to be, messing or futzing around with your game engine software.
Yeah,
cool.
It's a lot easier to communicate to a programmer, make this thing trigger when we play this level, and then make sure this parameter is tied to the number of enemies there. And just that's the end of the conversation, as opposed to, well, these 4 pieces of audio need to play when we start the event. And then if enemies are around, then I want you to fade these 3 out, bring these other 2 back in. Then when we get to this other point, I want you to then transfer to these other ones, but you have to do it a crossfade at this particular amount of time and in this way. And then you need to add these effects in this other way. Like that is a beast of a conversation. And that's what middleware helps with.
Nice. Another question. This one is it's pretty obvious, but I'm just going to throw it out there. How important is music theory if you want to make music for video games?
Well, again, I think I know plenty of people that are amazing composers and producers that don't have any sort of formal music background. When I actually met Mike Else, Professor Click, for the first time, he didn't know traditional notation. He had learned all of it on the computer. And that's very valid. I learned computer music from him and helped him learn traditional notation. But it's not absolutely necessary, but it only helps and amplifies all of the things that you're doing already on your own. If you're able to look at something and immediately know a ton of options based on theory and a number of rules to follow, or rules to know you should follow, but you know them so well that you can break these rules in these types of situations, that opens up a breadth of creativity and also expedites your writing process, because you're not just flailing around trying to figure out things. You're like, I know I could do a bunch of these other things. Let's quickly try them all and see what sounds cool.
Yeah, I
And of
think
course it's genre specific too. So this was very kind of classical in nature, this audio, but you've clearly played other games where it's, you know, very EDM feel or whatever. So I think you utilize the talents that you have, right? I mean, it's not to say that you couldn't expand those talents, but if you write metal, you find a game where they want to utilize a metal kind of sound and you implement that audio into that type of game.
awesome. Another question: do you actually get to play the games that you're working on while you're composing them? Is that a rarity typically, or is that?
If you, so the answer is yes and no, because we like to get involved with the game as early as possible. One, for obvious business development reasons, like they're working with us for this whole title. That's awesome, right? But the second part is that way we get to have a lot of conversations about what their intents with the game are, while they can still change things. It's happened before where developers just haven't been aware of the options in audio and music for their game. And based on what we told them the audio and music could do and what it could react to, they then changed game design decisions to then take advantage of that. Now, that's a rarity. I wish every collaboration experience was like that. But if we're on board with a team that early, it's probably too early for us to play anything that resembles the finished game. And so lots of times we'll have these conversations and we can begin writing music fairly early, but a lot of the sound design, maybe a lot of voice casting and things like that may actually have to wait until the game is developed enough to where there is something that's reasonably playable, or we can get a really precise feel for all of these music and audio choices that we're making, and really refine timings and things like that so it fits the best. So ideally, we're working on this audio and music without playing most of the game. Lots of times what happens is developers are like, oh shoot. But the nice thing about that is that there typically is something that's playable that we can then immediately test stuff out in, but then that limits kind of what we can do, because then we just have to fit what we're doing within what's already there.
Cool. Another question coming in from Greg Brook: who owns the loops that you compose? So actually, who owns the music once you compose something and then send it off to a game publishing company?
Got it. So that's on a project by project basis. As you get to higher tiered game opportunities, the developers want to own all the rights to anything and everything. So that is a complete buyout. They want to do this because a big part of marketing games is for streamers and other parts of the community, where if, say, you, the composer, or some other publishing entity had rights to the music, all of these streamers that might have millions of people watching them play the game can't actually play the game because of copyright issues with YouTube and all that kind of stuff. So developers want to buy the sounds, the music, all of it outright from you, so that there's no qualms with copyright issues once you're online and streamers are playing the game everywhere, and any random person is making a video and throwing it on YouTube. So when you're working in games, it is completely work for hire the vast majority of the time. When you're just starting out and working on smaller indie projects, non-exclusive and exclusive licenses are definitely options to explore, especially if it's a developer that doesn't have a lot of money that they can send your way. You can then take that music and submit it to a library, sell it to someone else, whatever, what have you. But once you get into some higher tier game projects, once you've been doing it for a bit, the vast majority of the time, they're going to want to do a full buyout with you.
Awesome. We got time for like one or two more questions. And one is, does your middleware technology choice restrict your developer options? Does the developer decide which one their music partner needs to use? This is from Dylan Adams. What's up, Dylan?
Yeah. So again, I guess yes and no. It's a case by case basis. lots of times if a developer is coming to us, it's because they're saying, we just don't audio, or we just don't music. Like, we don't do any of that stuff. So we trust you to make it happen. And that's what we specialize in, is creating the assets and making sure that they work in games in the best possible way. There are definitely developers, though, that prefer one over the other because, maybe they had to handle middleware integration on a past project. So they know and are comfortable with one and maybe not the other. So they'd prefer that you use that one, right? So from that standpoint, yes, it can be limiting. And Wise and Fmod do operate significantly differently conceptually and also visually. The GUI that you have for both of them is very different. So it may be a thing where they're more comfortable integrating it with their engine. And it also may be something where maybe they're actually familiar with using one middleware directly over the other. And conceptually, they understand this one. And conceptually, they do not understand the other one. That could be a whole nother topic of how those two middleware view and treat audio and music differently.
Awesome. Well, these are some great questions and some very powerful presentations by you guys. I really appreciate you taking the time. We might have time for one more if you squeeze it in, but I got a couple of maintenance things to do. One, I think we're going to raffle off a free 30-minute Ableton certified training private lesson from Graham Spice, and one from myself as well. We're going to raffle this off. So I think we have about 16 people. If you're interested in winning a free private lesson, type a number in the order that you see it, and I'm going to randomly generate a number. And the first one will get a free private lesson from Graham Spice, and the second one will get a free 30-minute private lesson for myself. So to go ahead and start typing some numbers in, and I'm going to do that random number generator. Another special offer from Ableton Live directly is I have some promo codes if you guys are interested in buying an Ableton Push 2 MIDI controller. It's the ultimate kind of all-in-one controller for Ableton Live. I'm sure you guys have heard of it or seen it if you're tuned into this workshop. That's going to save you 30% off. It brings the price down to like less than $600. So if you guys want a free, if you want that discount code for the push, shoot me an email. It's Orville Kline at mac.com. I'm typing it in the comments and I'll hook you up with that. Other news while I'm ringing off my promo list here at the end. Tomorrow, fellow certified trainer Darren Kramer is hosting Slink for the Denver Ableton User Group. It's kind of one of our sister user groups that's happening, and he's going to have Slink on there. I definitely recommend tuning in to that one if you guys can check it out. There's a Facebook event page link I'm going to type in, and on there you can RSVP to the Eventbrite link for that. One final plug is the next Ableton workshop that we're doing for our Chicago user group series is going to be in two weeks with Cloudchord and Brilliant. So this is going to be a really fun one. Make sure you guys RSVP to that. Make sure you guys follow the Ableton User Group Chicago fan page to stay posted on all the future workshops we have coming up. We have some really big artists we're trying to work on locking in coming up for this spring and summer. So definitely subscribe. You're not gonna want to miss all this stuff. Okay, I think I got it all. All right. So yeah, I'm gonna use this random number generator and we'll give away a couple of free lessons really fast if you guys are into it. All right, let me share my screen. You guys should all be able to see our random number generator right here. All right, so in the comments that I'm seeing, I'm just gonna do, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Try to make it 1 to 15, guys. We have 989 is too long, 22 is too far. 1 through 15. All right, 15, 9. We'll say 8. 808 will be 8. Ben will get 6. Carol will be 2. All right, let's do some random number generation here. And I'll put it 1 through 16. Let's see who's gonna win the first free private lesson with Graham Spice. Boom, 5. Did we have a 5 in the comments? Did someone say 5?
I think that was the first number that someone threw in there.
Boom. Who do we got here? Stephen Humphrey. Boom. Let's shoot me an email or shoot Graham an email so we can link up and get your lesson scheduled. I'm taking a note of that right now. And let's generate one more. 16. I think we had a 16 according to my screen share. If we had a 15, I think I said up to 15, so I'm going to do it one more time. But I should have maxed it out at 15. Let's see what we got. Boom, 12. Did we have a 12? Blah. Too much Facebook stuff going on at the same time. It's hard to keep track. Did we have a 12? No, did not have a 12. Let's do it one more time. Just to be fair for everyone here. This 4. Boom.
I don't think we had a 4 either.
No 4 either. A 420. Greg Brook did 420. That's close enough for tonight's workshop. So congratulations, Greg. Shoot me an email and we'll get you hooked up with that free lesson. Once again, my email is orville.kline@mac. Make sure you get in contact with us if you want to get these lessons scheduled. If you guys are interested in other Ableton certified training or private lessons, consultations, hit me up. Graham, where can we find your stuff? Where are you doing lessons, or what? If you're interested in getting certified in WISE, you're offering that, correct?
Absolutely. Yep. My website is grahamspice.com. I'm really easy to get, me@grahamspice.com. I also wanted to mention that if you are interested in this kind of stuff, if you want to get into game audio, there are what's called game jams that are supported on a very, very regular basis that you can get involved in. They're always looking for audio people. They're always looking for noobs that don't have a lot of background in this. So definitely consider joining one of those. I'm going to put a link in the comments to a directory of global game jams that are out there, and they happen all the time. So you can join one of these. You can become a part of the team to develop a game. You can join it in any capacity. So Elliot was really talking about, like, how do you plant your flag and actually do something instead of saying, well, that's interesting and something I might want to get into. If this is really something you want to try out, join a game jam, get involved. There's undoubtedly ones happening in your area. But obviously with the situations that we're in, you can do this all over the internet easily. So do check out game jams and see if there's something that you can get involved in. That's a really, really smooth way to get some experience, to add to your portfolio, and then maybe learn one of these middlewares in the process too. So thanks a lot.
Awesome. Anything you want to plug before we wrap up tonight, Elliot?
The only things I would say is, one, if you're interested in game audio and music and thinking about college, check out DePaul. You got a good, cool program. I'd have you in a class. It'd be cool for that to happen. And other than that, my company's name is Unlock Audio. We do all audio and music for games, voice, implementation, the whole thing. So yeah, if you want your game to sound great, hit me up.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, guys. And we'll see you back at the Ableton User Group Chicago virtual workshop in 2 weeks. Once again, follow the Ableton User Group Chicago fan page. Join the Ableton Chicago User Group community page to get even more some insider tips and some feedback is appreciated as well. I had a great time, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks a ton.
Thanks for